Hi, I'm Derek Weeks, Vice President and DevOps Advocate at Sonatype, and I will be your host today for this on-demand webcast. In today's application economy, speed is of the essence. And to develop and launch new high-quality applications and services, many organizations have turned to DevOps practices. But truth be told, there's more to DevOps than an increased release velocity. We need to make sure that we're building quality into our applications and that these applications are secure. And that's where DevSecOps comes in. In the first installment of this webinar series, I'm going to introduce you to 3 executives that I've been working with at Fannie Mae who are leading their DevSecOps initiative. I've worked with the team at Fannie Mae for a couple of years, and they have an incredible set of experiences to share. Not only have they made their applications more secure, but they've made their developers more productive and driven massive code quality improvements for their organization. I met these 3 executives at a recent DevSecOps meetup that was hosted at Fannie Mae, where we had over 178 people live in the audience. So without further ado, let me introduce you to their team. First off, Satya Adagarla. He is the Vice President of Front-End Technologies at Fannie Mae. Welcome, Satya. It's great to have you with us for today's webcast.
Thank you, Derek.
Next up is Michael Garcia. Michael is Vice President of Development Services at Fannie Mae. Michael, welcome. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Derek. I'm very excited to be here.
And finally, Chris Porter. He is the Chief Information Security Officer at Fannie Mae. Welcome, Chris. It's great to have you on board today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here as well.
Excellent. So let's get started and dive into the discussion for some insight on Fannie Mae's DevSecOps journey. To make it easier for all of you that are watching the webcast today, I've made sure that we've included pictures of each of the executives on each of the slides as we go out, so you can more easily put a name to a voice or a face to a voice as we go through this. The first part of the conversation that I want to strike out on or strike into is the DevSecOps value proposition for the business. So I was just at DevSecOps Days, New York City, a couple of days ago. And there was a live discussion there in open spaces on the value of bringing security into the DevOps practice. And a lot of, mainly developers in that audience were trying to or were grasping with what's the real value of bringing security in. This is a group for many of them that are just getting started on their DevOps journey or somewhere along the way. They haven't yet ingrained security into those practices. When the 3 of you are working within your business, how do you explain the value proposition of DevOps and DevSecOps to your business as a whole? And even more so, when you have to explain it to the board in terms of investments that you want or your managers, how do you explain the value proposition of DevSecOps? Michael, why don't we start with you first?
Absolutely. I think the important thing to recognize is in any company, InfoSec and security has been something that everybody wants. They want the best they can get without interfering with speed to market, right? And because of that, oftentimes, people will get very frustrated when you all of a sudden at the end of a delivery cycle have about 100 or so defects that you got to go back and fix. And the same cycle that we've learned about from testing in other areas, it costs a lot more to fix something at the end of a cycle. Even if we're talking about even a 2-week sprint, or incremental builds, it costs a lot than, having the developers solve it right away when they're doing their coding. So the value prop becomes something like 300% cheaper to solve it in the moment that the developers find the problem. And so it also puts trust in the hands of the developers, which is a really important cultural element to all this. So the way that you can kind of help people understand this is that we're moving away from this antiquated world where InfoSec becomes a cop that checks you out at the end of your release. Instead, we're basically saying we deputize the entire dev team to kind of self-police and kind of get involved early and often. So when they do have to pass through that final gate, it should be a fast pass, a real easy pass for them to get through. It definitely, the evidence is there when you kind of look at the releases that we've done, and as we've incorporated automatic builds with tools like Fortify or our IDE plugins, you actually will see pretty quickly that the quality of the builds have been going up. The number of throughput of builds has been going up too. So it isn't just lip service. It is something that they're getting real value for faster. And guess what? They realize one day, hey, we haven't been bothered by kind of one of these like surprise security findings at the end of the release anymore. So I think that the value really comes in that aspect of DevSecOps.
Satya, what's your point of view on DevSecOps as you see it at Fannie Mae?
Yeah, so I'm leading the development and delivery of the front-end technology for single family. So that means my application delivery is being directly utilized by my client segments, right? So that means our lenders are our customers who would see this, right? So the expectation in the marketplace is significantly changing, right? They want the things that they would like immediately. That means speed is of the essence. Since our clients are mostly financial institutions, security is top of mind for everybody. So anything that we develop, it has to be faster so that my clients can see the value of it quickly, and security has to be top of mind. So anything we deliver has to be safe and secure for my clients. So given these two factors, our business guys fully understand as we are developing solutions, we not only iterate them, but we also have our DevOps practices in place so that they enable speed for us. Then our mindset is a request from business should start and end at the developer. So as long as it doesn't take multiple hops deeper into the organization, then we can enable speed in terms of developing, deploying, and so forth. So as a result, we had to drive the security mindset into the developer, not security as a QA function. So that is where when we look at it, how do we do these things much faster, safety, security on top of it, and delivering in an iterative manner is being the name of the game for us. And it has been acknowledged by our management too. Both of them are not, one doesn't come with compromising the other. Both have to be top priorities. And that is how we kind of see DevSecOps is enabling us to do both those things effectively for our customers.
Mm-hmm. Chris, I want to go over to you. One of the things, I'll look back to this DevOps Days New York City discussion that I was in. John Willis was also part of that discussion, and I know you all know him from the meetup that we had at Fannie Mae as well. So John Willis said, when I'm sitting down and I'm talking to CISOs, he said, there's a simple DevSecOps value proposition, which is don't get Equifaxed. You don't want to be, Equifaxed as a verb. What's your reaction to that, or how do you see the value proposition of DevSecOps at Fannie Mae?
Yeah, I think some of this goes along to the journey that information security, as well as the rest of the company, and working with Satya and Michael, has been on in the last couple of years. Even prior to us really going the DevSecOps journey, part of that was just trying to move security further to the left, as we called it. How do we build security in up front? So as Michael talked about, we're not bolting it on at the end, right? And so a lot of the processes that we started putting in place probably 3 years ago was really about, how do we help the developers? How do we train them a little bit more so that they understand what a security vulnerability is? How do we get them using these different types of tools, and really kind of starting to kind of push some of that responsibility over into that area, because it doesn't make economic sense to do it at the end, right? There was a big book several years ago called Geekonomics that really talked about software security and how expensive it was to bolt it on afterwards. And it's way cheaper and way easier to do it up front. But to kind of talk about what Satya and Michael said, speed is one of the most important things. But it's not just speed to get the product out, but it's also the speed to fix things, right? If we find some type of issue or vulnerability or defect, as we'll talk about here in a little bit, this process allows us to fix it so much faster. And ultimately, what I see as the biggest benefit to security and DevSecOps in general is that it's providing trust to our customers. And that's where the I don't want to get Equifax thing comes out of, because there was a loss of trust between Equifax and all of their customers that work with them. And so ultimately what we're trying to do is instill that trust and confidence into our customers to make sure that that our applications are secure enough that we can do that business in confidence.
Excellent. Yeah, there were so many good points on there that I know we're going to discuss moving forward. So, the trust, the speed to fix, bolt-on versus built-in, and so forth. So with that, let's jump to our next topic about the importance of culture. So the next topic that I want to get into is the importance of culture. I see this part of the conversation across the DevOps community, and there's a lot of conversation as people are just getting started on their journeys about the culture of the organization and the importance. And a lot of this plays into breaking down silos within the organization. Do developers talk to the people in QA and test enough, or in operations? And security is part of that team as well. I know that you guys have each commented on the importance of culture and the value proposition that DevSecOps brings to the organization. But how do you use or drive the importance of culture inside Fannie Mae to help break down silos and increase collaboration between development, security, and operations teams? Chris, why don't I let you take the lead on this one?
Oh, thank you. Let me give really a strong example of, a kind of simple change when it comes to culture that can make a huge difference. So a lot of times in security, when you're doing application security testing, you find vulnerabilities. And then once those vulnerabilities are found, you need to have some sort of process to fix it. DevSecOps, as what we've done is we've really integrated a lot of that testing, that security testing, over onto the developer side. But one of the things that was kind of preventing us from making a lot of headway early on was the difference between a code defect as it was defined within DevOps versus how we were defining fixes or things that need to be fixed, just security vulnerabilities. And one of the things that kind of dawned on me early on is that a security vulnerability is really just another type of defect that needs to be fixed. And just like what you would have on a feature that is broken within the application, and you have a defect within that application, you have to go through as a developer and fix it, and then it goes through the whole testing process again to get through. And we kind of just made a slight change. We stopped talking about it in terms of, hey, here's your list of security findings or security vulnerabilities that needed to be fixed. But here's your list of defects that need to be fixed, of which the security components were just another type of defect that was in the list of all the other defects that needed to be fixed. And ultimately, that was a huge change for us. Like, we statistically were able to show the number of days that it took what we called a vulnerability or a security defect to get fixed went down substantially. Like, things were getting fixed way quicker when we did it that way. And it was just a very simple nomenclature discussion, just changing something from one terminology to another terminology that was more in line with the DevOps culture. And I think that to us made a huge difference. The other piece is just culture of responsibility. Developers want to write good code. They want to make sure that the code that they're writing gets into production as quickly as possible. And when you hand them the rest of the responsibility to where you make it where it's entirely within their control to get it done, it makes a huge difference as well. So a lot of that piece around responsibility, accountability, really moved forward with helping us, I think, tremendously.
It's a great point about kind of getting everyone on the same page with a common terminology and replacing vulnerability with defect, I think is a great perspective to look at it. Michael, from the development side, and again, I'll go back to just the most recent conversation I had in New York with the folks at the DevOps Days discussion. A lot of the developers there just kind of saw security as the cops in the organization, or people that wanted to kind of enforce toll gates on them, in terms of checkpoints that they needed to live by, or putting on so many restrictions that they could be less innovative in their development roles. How does your team see security and interact with security from the cultural point of view?
So I think there's a couple of really important things to know in this. And to carry on what Chris was saying about, pushing things down in trust, one of the easiest mechanisms as leaders you can do to help kind of encourage this kind of behavior is ask yourselves in the meeting, are we solutioning at too high of a level? Is this something that we can push down to these teams and have them solve for us? You really demotivate a group when you say you're empowered, but then all the decisions come down from on top. I think what really made the difference here at Fannie was Chris's team, our team, the different dev teams like Satya's got together, and they figured out the right solution for the pipeline, the value stream that they had in place. And what you saw was Chris, for example, in InfoSec, not necessarily doing the traditional hires that you would find in InfoSec, right? I think what happened in other organizations that I've been in, you get a lot more policy-type folks facing off with the app teams. Instead, what you see is, you have an InfoSec team that has people with hands-on keyboard skills that can actually get involved in implementing automation and working hand in hand with the shared services as well as the development teams. That makes a very powerful mixture, because you're no longer hindered by something that, like we were talking about, like, cops that, with gates at the end. Instead, you've got people setting up kind of, automatic compliance, automation, right? And it makes it a lot better for everyone. But I can't stress enough, it's kind of a combination of getting the right hires, setting the right kind of attitude, and then from the leadership perspective, truly empowering them to solution at their level. Don't come in and say, thou shalt do these 5 things. Encourage them to go and figure that out. And I think that's where that's really sets the key ingredients. And then when you trust people, it's amazing what they'll do with that. They'll go pretty far.
Don't pass the buck to the other organization to try and solve that problem, or throw the rules down your way to enforce your behavior. But, I love that piece of advice to tell people to really, integrate the way of thinking of, maybe this is our problem to solve, and who can we bring in to help us solve that, and to be collaborative and meet with each other in the same rooms. Satya, from your point of view, what is the importance of culture within your DevSecOps practice?
I mean, the culture is the key ingredient in this, right? Not only the developer mindset, but the business guy's mindset and also the management mindset around this, right? When everything is hunky-dory, in the sense that you have enough time to do things, people will make right choices. I think we know that. I think in the time of tension, that means, hey, we have to go to the market very quickly, and now we have few things we have identified, right? So how do we avoid that situation so that we engage all these teams up front in the game, right? That means we have cross-functional teams now at the initiation of the project or the PI planning, where they are talking about not only what functions need to be developed for the market, but also during the deployments, what kind of security-related stuff we need to address them first. So the idea of these are the things we need to think about, not just functional aspects of it, as they are entering into the Scrum planning sessions, right? So that is where it starts from the left on the engagement side. Then when it comes to the tension situation, hey, we have identified something that needs to be fixed as a defect, then you have a hard choice to make from the business point of view. Okay, do I bring this down to fix this, or do I keep this up and running? So there we can help this entire discussion by having the ability to quickly remediate these types of things, right? We have a couple of things that we put in practice. One is that, hey, how quickly can we do this? Because it is security related as well as we don't want to impact the customers. So that is where the DevSecOps enables the speed for us. And then the second one is business is actually coming down with the mindset of, hey, this is important. We understand there is going to be impact, but security is higher importance. So even that thinking has come through. So the management side as well as the development side, having the awareness of the security and having the awareness of speed, how important that is, I think it truly helped us move things to the left and then deliver things in a safety and sound, right? And generally, when there are upgrades that need to happen, people don't pay attention to managing their operating systems or their patches levels and whatnot. That is when we typically get in trouble in production, right? But the whole program around, we have to have less than 10% of that. We call it as MUL, mandatory upgrade list. So there is this religion about we have to keep the entire stack up to the date. I think that has gotten into the development teams, and they are proactively looking at what is coming down the pike and coming to remediate them as soon as they get the patch. So that kind of mindset also kind of helps. So all these three different key ingredients, how management is thinking about it, how do we engage all the teams upfront so that they have handle on deployment, not only just development time, and then ability to do things speed and fast. Those are the key things in our culture that we have come a long way at Fannie Mae.
It's a great point that you make about mindset, because I think, all of the comments kind of play into that or toward that, if you have the right mindset from the beginning about whose responsibility is and what actions we can take as an organization and what's important for the business outcomes, it really does make a difference. And I think, more important, a lot of people talk about automation within DevOps or DevSecOps being kind of the thing that they want to focus on, because they think automation equates with the velocity, value proposition of DevSecOps. But if you don't get that culture right, it doesn't matter what tools or automation you bring into play to help your organization with. Speaking of that, though, I do want to shift the conversation over to the importance of automation. And Satya and Chris, I want to focus on you two for this particular part of the conversation. Satya, at the meetup at Fannie Mae, you said something that I've happened to repeat several times to different audiences that I've been working with. When you were talking about, I think it was related to the Struts vulnerability that had impacted Equifax, but just looking at overall, how to deal with vulnerabilities that come into your organization that you're trying to remediate as quickly as possible. And you said, we looked at I don't know if it was the Struts vulnerability specifically or another open source vulnerability, but you said when we identified that we had this vulnerable component in our environment, we didn't look at it as I have a vulnerability that I needed to fix, but there's a new business requirement that I need to get out into production as quickly as possible. And for you had mentioned that was a 2-day turn to basically take those systems offline, update them with the right components, and bring them out into production again. And it was really the moving a new business requirement into production. How does automation help you in this regard within your DevSecOps practice?
Yeah, it is indeed Struts vulnerability, Derek, and the system was actually a home counselor online. So like you mentioned, right, the key aspect of this is that is seen as a business requirement. We want to get into production so quickly, right? But we were able to do that in 2 days only because we had the entire DevOps pipeline built prior to these things, right? So as we have been transforming in the last 3 years, the key aspect of our entire development cycle is getting teams to do things iteratively and fast. And those things are powered by the DevOps and DevSecOps, because the reason why we said DevSecOps is that driving that security mindset into the developer to the left. So by having the entire pipeline automated is the reason why we were able to run the regression suite so quickly and then get into the marketplace within 2 days. So that is pretty remarkable, especially thinking that this system doesn't have so many releases, because when you have many releases, a lot of people actually have eyes on the code. When there are so less number of releases, that is when people don't have eyes on the code yet. These type of automation having in place kind of helps us get through those pretty quickly because you can run regression tests, you can run system tests and so forth automatically through the day.
Yeah, I think it was really eye-opening for me in terms of the mindset of, wow, I have a new business requirement. I have 2 days to get it in production, or that's the amount of time it takes through our automated pipeline. It was a complete transformation in my mind on how to think about the problem. Chris, from a security standpoint, a lot of the automation that's happened in security over the years has, of course, been beneficial to the IT organization, but a lot of the traditional tools out there, traditional processes, have long lead times, 8 hours, 24 hours, multiple weeks maybe to get things approved. How do you work in a DevSecOps mindset when it comes to automation, and what's really required of automation choices that you bring into your practice at Fannie Mae?
I think automation actually has two different dimensions. It's not just making something, automating something to make it, go faster. But I think integration is the other piece that's incredibly important. Like, it's one thing to automate a scan, right? Security's been doing that for years with vulnerability scans. We turn something on, we run a scan, it runs all night long, it does it by itself. No one has to sit there and babysit it, right? But when it comes to automation of, application security things, another important component is to make sure it's integrated, that automation is integrated with the pipeline. And it kicks off with certain workflows, right? So here's a really good example. You have code that's being worked on. In the background, it's automatically letting the developer know whether or not there's, some very simple security vulnerabilities that are popping up. Maybe it has to do with input validation on a field within the application that they're working on, or something to that nature. But not just that piece. Like, once the code is checked in to the code repository, then a whole bunch of other things kick off. And so while the developer is going off and doing something else altogether, now there's a security process that's kicked off, and it automatically doing some type of testing, against that code, looking for those defects that need to be fixed. And then when the developer comes back to it, because they're, coming off another project and working on this one today, they now open it up and they've got their list of defects, both from a functional perspective as well as the security defects that they have to fix. And they now know what they have to do for the day. And none of that can be done without having both the automation components as well as the integration components. So you have to have both of those, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's a good point when you talk about automation. Automation is helping that thing move faster, but the integration is really where is it helping that thing move faster. Not only where within the DevOps pipeline, but also who is that serving? Is it serving a security person in the pipeline, or is it serving a developer with more information about, is the line of code that I just wrote, secure in its function or not? So I think those how, who's, and where's within the DevOps pipeline are critical. So moving along, I want to change up topics a little and talk about the people that we need to get the work done. There's a lot of conversation around the DevOps industry about, I need people that know how to do this, that practice DevOps, and internally I don't have those people. But when we look back to 2014, Andrew Clay Schaefer, who was one of the founding fathers of the DevOps movement, said, you're either building a learning organization or you're losing to someone who is. When you think about hiring decisions or training decisions internally for your employees, how do you approach integrating development and security together? Michael, why don't you take the lead on this?
Sure. The way that I would say is, you start with the organization you have, and you start to you look at it and say, okay, well, what are the current roles and what are the job descriptions that they have, and then you put out kind of what your target is, and clearly your target's going to look like something along the lines of, more hands-on ability to automate around a particular technology that you pick as kind of your suite of tools for your organization, as well as, you're going to want people who are on top of kind of the industry trends and can kind of understand, your application suite and your industry. So you need to do that gap analysis up front and say, okay, well, I can see where my gaps are. Now how do I fix them? And then from there, you have to do kind of a multi-tier strategy. In our case, what we did was partly we said, okay, we're going to pull together a curriculum on training folks and see how it goes. That's step one. And when you do that, you're going to have an expectation that you're going to have pretty high failure rates if you're significantly changing the practice. And that's not a bad thing. And what I'll say is you'll take certain roles that maybe you have very previously been along the lines of kind of more of a project analyst type person who would go through and kind of make sure boxes were checked, things were complied with, and things along those lines. And now you're replacing them with somebody who has automation skills. So you're not going to have a lot of those folks who are going to be able to make that transition, but you try anyways. It builds goodwill and faith with the folks you've got. At the same time, you obviously work on trying to get some targeted hires into the group. And you do that, early, so that way you've got kind of some clear, this is what we're looking for kind of as far as a job and roles and skills. And in order to do that, I highly recommend that you work with your HR departments to come up with the new roles for the organization. Be very clear about what differentiates this from the roles of the past. Explain kind of make sure the career path is there. And the career pathing is really important because here's the third angle on this that I think is really key. You can also create and grow those outside of your organization. So we partnered with an organization outside that we gave them a very specific curriculum on the tools and the technologies that we were using inside Fannie, and they, on their dime, spent 4 months building that out. Right, training those individuals that we kind of interviewed from the outside, and then we were able to kind of bring them in at kind of a more entry-level skill set. But ultimately, a couple years into your journey, they're going to be further along, and they're going to be performing at a slightly more senior level, and you can hire them into your organization, and then they become part of your DNA too. So it's a little mixture of train, hire, and grow. Whether that talent you have to grow for yourself outside to acquire inside, or vice versa. But it's really important to have the end state in mind. What are those target roles? What are your gaps today? How are you going to go about doing that? And you have to commit to it, because if you don't, then you're never going to get anywhere just with the expectations you'd set on your previous roles. So I encourage everyone to kind of take a hard look at what they've got and find those gaps for themselves.
So, Michael, excellent points there. Chris, when you think about the career path for security professionals that you work with, both inside and outside of the company, when you take on a DevSecOps perspective or mindset to that career path, what advice would you have for your peers in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, certainly within cybersecurity across the industry, there's a massive supply-demand issue that's pretty evident. You hear and read in articles around, X number of many million cybersecurity jobs will be unfilled by 2021 kind of terminology. And so certainly that's a big issue. I think one of the things that Mike kind of alluded to earlier around getting the right people in information security is to make sure that you have the right people who understand, what it is to be a developer, right? You have to understand how to be a developer in a lot of the cases to understand application security code and application security vulnerabilities and defects, et cetera. And so we've had a lot of success in actually hiring developers and teaching them security. So they understand the development processes, they understand what it feels like to be a developer, the responsibilities of a developer, and what are the kinds of things that they want. But then coming back and teaching them, hey, this is how you write secure code, this is how you check code, this is how you do testing, this is how you hand test a vulnerability to make sure whether or not it exists or not. And we've had a tremendous amount of success turning developers into application security penetration testers or just into cybersecurity analysts that really understand that. And that's been really helpful because then they can go back to the developer and they could speak to them as a developer and say, hey, this is what you need to change in your code. You have a SQL injection vulnerability, which means it does this, this, and that. And so you need to change your code by putting this little snippet in there, and you're going to be good to go at this point. And that has been very tremendous for us.
Yeah, I think what you're really getting at, and a lot of us talk about in the DevOps community, is empathy. A kind of similar example when talking with Shannon Leitz, who leads the DevSecOps practice at Intuit. She said, I bring security people into my team, and their first assignment is to go and build an application. And they build that application for a week, and then the security team basically attacks it. And, part of that exercise is to create some empathy about, it was pretty hard to create that application over the last week to just function, but my gosh, I had to make it secure at the same time. And it kind of, puts them in the other person's shoes for a little while to say, it's not that easy just to say, build a secure application. But I think, the method that you're using to help build empathy within and between the teams is really important. Shifting gears to the next subject, I want to bring Satya in to talk about the balance of speed and control within DevSecOps practices. So a lot of people are wondering, can you have your cake and eat it too? There's a lot of, I think, core beliefs out there in the industry on maybe traditional waterfall or agile development approaches that if you introduce security controls, it's going to slow you down. What's your take and your experience on this topic?
So, Derek, earlier I kind of mentioned that our mindset is that if it is a security requirement, we don't see that as a security requirement. We see that as another business requirement we want to get into the production as quickly as possible, right? So just the mindset around it, that is the first one. Second one is the speed and control. End of the day, anything that we launch into production, we need to manage the risk. The risk to our customer, risk to our assets within the company, how do we manage that? So as long as those controls are known up front, I think people will work through that in the process, right? So that is where we put significant emphasis on automating the pipeline. So we know up front what things are happening. Do we have automatic scans in our environment to figure out, are there things that are getting out of upgrade list? So do we need to patch something? So being proactive around that will enable the speed, right? While you can think of always there is going to be a control for speed, but where do you put that control? Is it to the end of it or is it to the left of it? I think that's the key aspect of it, right? So as long as we have controls known and drive them towards left of the process, we can still manage the speed. I think that's the key aspect of it. End of the day, we are in the business of managing the risk to our customer.
And the other point, and there are so many valuable points that have come up in this conversation is there's part of the speed is I think it was Chris who said part of the speed is automation in doing something, but it's also the speed in how you fix something. What information is available to the development teams in order to fix something. So the controls are sometimes part of that fix within the organization or within the process. As we kind of close out the discussion here, I want to start off with Michael and go through actually each of you for if you could offer one piece of advice to any of the people out there that are listening, that are just getting started on their thinking around their DevSecOps journey, or maybe are perhaps somewhere along the way in it. What one piece of advice would you offer to them? Michael, let's start off with you, and then we'll go to Chris and Satya following.
I am a firm believer that you can really empower a team and set them down to the right path. They will be able to do anything you ever imagined and more. And I think that there's some wonderful groups out there that have kind of really pushed for ways of working in that's different but yet repeatable. When you think about Toyota, everybody talks about the Toyota way, and there's something to it. And the reason why is because it takes a repeatable process. You empower people to make decisions on the line, and you don't allow problems just to persist. You fix it right then and there when it's the cheapest to do. And there's a really great book called the DevOps Handbook that I think talks about the 3 ways of DevOps. And DevOps Sec falls right into that in the thinking. And the thing to remember is, the pattern follows very, very similarly in everything you do. If you get a team of people together and they don't know where to begin, follow the first way. Can you visualize your work? If you can't visualize your work, then it's going to be hard for you to start to figure out where your impediments are and how to fix them. The second way is getting feedback loops. Now, how do you now set triggers across this thing so that way you're constantly getting feedback from your system on how things are going and where you may need to make small adjustments? And then the third way is about continuous learning, and that is, always pushing yourself to the next level and trying to learn more and trying to, go ahead and try those new things. The teams that we've seen here and where they've succeeded have been really pushing the envelope. And I've been so surprised that oftentimes we'll start up something early in the year that I think is kind of like a Horizon 3, kind of probably several years down the road if it ever sees the light of day. All of a sudden it becomes like the urgent thing 6 months later, and we're already working on it for the end of this year. So, really encourage people to be methodical about their approach. Don't fall into this trap of say, oh yes, just put a bunch of automation in there and go at it. They need some sort of structure. And, Google had a really good quotation, when I was out there a few years ago talking to them, and they have this motto that says, genius loves constraint. And it's really true. When you take a group of people and you give them a constraint that they have to work within, they will do some pretty creative things to optimize and kind of really drive value out of their system. So don't be afraid to put those kind of constraints in there, but you have to empower them to be able to work within those realms. So my advice is, definitely approach this, but approach this with a seriousness and a method. Don't just try to go at this kind of willy-nilly, because you're going to end up failing. But please do go in this with the intention of empowering people, trusting people, but giving them a better way of doing things.
That's awesome. I love that. Genius loves constraint. I will have to use that in the future. Absolutely. Satya, why don't you go next? What's your one piece of advice that you could offer out to our audience?
So we have gone through the journey for about 2.5 years, and we are continuing to go through this, right? There is no doubt, right? DevOps is empowering, bringing in speed to our entire cycle, right? But be very cognizant that by just having the tool set, it is not over. We really have to focus on the DevOps engineering aspects for the software developer, right? So the software engineer should know while he is going through the speed, he is managing few things, which is how do you sustain those things in production? How do you reduce the mean time to recovery if something were to go down? All those things will only come through this DevSecOps pipeline as your engineering aspects and engineering levels go up. So it is hard and it takes time. So don't get impatient. It is a journey and you won't get there in day one. So having the tool set, but also continuing to improving your practices around engineering are the key aspects to get to the other end of not only delivering the secure and speed software, but also when situations arise, how do you reduce those mean time to recovery so that you can quickly go back, fix it, bring it back up. So it's all about driving the people to continuously learn and improve their engineering practices, not only having the tool set. So that is one thing I would say that people have to put focus on. It feels like we have reached there, but there is always room for improvement. So keep pushing it, and it is not an easy win. It'll take time.
Yeah, I love that point because, as a lot of people talk about, shifting practices left with DevOps, and then they talk about, automating certain practices to get them to move faster. What they often forget is automation also has to do with the fast feedback loops. And the faster the feedback loops, the faster the mean time to repair can be within the organization. So it's not just about how work moves forward fast, but there are feedback loops baked into each step of the process that need to be automated. And it's those feedback loops when things go wrong that actually help us accelerate our practices for repairing them. The other point that I just have to emphasize for our audience because it's so important is I haven't heard anyone say, oh yeah, we started our DevOps journey in January and we finished in June. Everyone has a multi-year, process or transformation that they're going through. And I don't think I've heard anyone say they've reached the end point either, but I think you have to have the mindset, and the awareness from the beginning that this is not a 3-month or 6-month project to kind of do and then, you're finished. So, Chris, let's go over to you. What's your one piece of advice as a CISO that you could offer to our audience?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure that I can really improve too much on what Michael and Satya said. I mean, I fully agree with what you also said, that this is a journey. I would almost say that there actually isn't an endpoint. There's no such thing, because when you have a continuously improving process, having that process is the endpoint, right? But it's always changing, and you're putting in that methodology to help it change. I agree with Michael that the DevOps handbook is great. I bought a copy of that for every member of my application security team. And in fact, I went to one of the chapters in the back and I said, go do this. When it first came out, we actually had Gene Kim come out and speak to us right before that book published. But if there were a couple of things I could say is, one is I think alignment at the top when it comes to strategy on how to do this, I think is incredibly important. I don't think we would be as successful as we have if Satya and Michael and myself didn't together know that this was the right thing to do. And then more importantly, we then kind of empowered our people to go actually do it. And we got out of the way. We helped them clear hurdles. We helped them, get through some of the cultural issues that we needed to get through. But ultimately, we were in alignment with each other, and then we got out of the way and empowered people to do the job that they needed to do. And I think that's made all the difference.
Thank you so much. I've learned so much from this conversation today. I think the insights that each of you provided were excellent. I took a ton of notes. I feel like I have about 6 blogs that I could write, through some of the knowledge and experience that you shared. So a big sincere thanks to our guests today from Fannie Mae, Satya Adagarla, Michael Garcia, and Chris Porter. That's all the time we have on this on-demand webcast today. Thanks to everyone, again, for participating and sharing your experiences. For more information on this topic, please click the green resources icon on your screen. And for Sonatype and CSO, I'm Derek Weeks.